And if you're a guest with us today, one of the things we say around here is Hope City is a place where you can belong before you believe. And so our hope is that you're going to feel at home, you're going to feel welcome, you're going to feel like you're amongst friends. And so if we can answer any questions for you or serve you in any way, please let us know. That connection card, as Jeremy said, is vital for us just to follow up with you, get more information to you about our church, and let us know how we might be able to come alongside you as you journey through faith. And one of the things I love is that no matter where you are in your faith today, if you're a lifelong follower of Jesus, or if this is the first time you've been to church in a long time, we believe that God meets you right where you're at. And so I'm excited about this new series we're kicking off today. It's called Stranger Things. And while it's not based on the Netflix show, the second season of the Netflix show releases on October 27th. And so we thought it would be a great way for us to introduce this new series that we're talking about the miracles of Jesus. And in 20 years of ministry, I've never done a series on the miracles of Jesus. And so I'm really excited to spend the next 6 weeks just really diving into God's Word and trying to understand what the miracles of Jesus 2,000 years ago have to do with our lives today. And I think it's going to be an incredible series. I'm really excited about it. And so I want to encourage you, come next week. We put an invite card on each of your seats. Mail that to somebody or hand that out to somebody at work or at school or wherever you might be at the gym. And invite them back for week 2. The series isn't going to build on itself. Each week's going to stand on its own. So they won't miss anything if they're not here this Sunday. They'll be able to come back with you next week. And it's a great series to invite friends to. One of the things that I've recognized as I was preparing for this week is we all have different definitions of miracles, right? And I think we've kind of watered down the term miracle. I don't know if you were alive during the 80s, there was the Miracle on Ice when the U.S. Hockey team beat the Russians. We called that the Miracle on Ice, right? And then I lived in Nashville for 6 years, and they were still talking about 10 years later, they were talking about the Music City Miracle when the Titans took a kickoff and they laddered it like 9 times and scored a touchdown against the Bills to win a playoff game. They called that the Music City Miracle. Then there's also the miracle of taking my high school attendance my senior year and my diploma and comparing it with one another. It was a miracle I graduated because I was hardly ever at school. I kind of skipped my senior year of high school, and so it would be called a miracle that I actually graduated from high school and went to college. And I think so often we take the word miracle and we humanize it so much that it doesn't really have a lot of meaning in our life. And so I thought what we could do today as we kind of kick off this series is come to a place where we have a working definition of the word miracle. And so here's how Webster's defines miracle. Miracle is a surprising and welcome event that is not explicable by nature or scientific laws and is therefore considered to be the work of a divine agency. Now, if you understand that definition, that's a miracle, okay? It's a miracle if you understand that. And so one of the things I try to simplify things a little bit because I read at a 4th grade level. But I try to think, what is a simpler way of saying this? And here's my definition of a miracle: a divine solution to an earthly problem. A miracle really is a divine solution. It's God intervening in a divine way. It's God intervening in a supernatural way. It's God showing up in a powerful way with heavenly force and heavenly power into a human problem and solving that problem, bringing a divine solution to an earthly issue. That's what a miracle is. And I think as I look at the scriptures and I look at the miracles of Jesus, I think it's really cool to think, okay, man, it's awesome to think about the miracles of Jesus. It's awesome to think about God showing up in a powerful way. But here's the problem. Lifeway Research did a survey. Lifeway is an organization in Nashville that studies culture. They study church trends. And 3 years ago, they did a survey, and 87% of Americans have at least one Bible in their home. 87% I can't even tell you how many Bibles we have in our house. But here's what's more interesting than that. That's a high percentage in my opinion. 87% of Americans have at least one Bible in their home. Only 36% of Americans believe the Bible to be true. 36%. So even if you round up, 4 out of 10 people, 4 out of 10 Christians believe that the Bible, the Word of God, the book that's been handed down from generation to generation, is actually true for all people in all places at all times. And so it's kind of this weird dynamic, right? To try to talk about the supernatural aspect of God as recorded in His Word, when I know as I'm talking that some of you are going to be like, I don't believe that. That's a nice story. That's a nice fairy tale. That's something that could be really cute, but I don't really believe it. And can I just say that's okay? It's okay. We're gonna talk about some things over the next few weeks that are not explainable. I'm just gonna be straight up honest with you. We're gonna talk about some things over the next few weeks that you're gonna sit back, you're gonna cross your arms, you're gonna go, maybe he is smoking crack enough to believe that, but that's not me, okay? If you could explain everything about God, would he really be God? Like there is an innate characteristic of the word miracle. It should be unexplainable. It should blow your mind. It should cause you to go, oh, I don't know. That's why it's a miracle, right? That's why it's miraculous. That's why it's divine power intersecting with our earthly lives. And if you could explain a miracle, it would not be miraculous. And so I want to encourage you to lean into the tension, lean into the disbelief, lean into the thought process that you're going to go, whew, that's really far-fetched. Because here's the deal. The Bible is far-fetched. I don't know if you know that or not. The Bible was written by 40 different people. It's 66 different books. It's not just one, it's one story, but it's 66 different books contributing to that story by 40 different authors across 2,000 years. And I don't even know how many continents. I'm thinking at least 6 continents. I could be wrong. Some of you will email me and tell me that I was wrong and tell me the right amount of continents. That's cool. I'm good with that. But it was not written all at the same place by the same person at the same time. It was written over thousands of years by 40 different authors to comprise 66 different books, but it tells the same story. That is a strange composition of a book. And that's just the Bible itself. Not to mention the stories of the Bible that are strange. Water parting, earth flooding, donkeys talking, sun standing still. And that's just in the Old Testament. Then you put in the miracles of Jesus, water turning into wine, people coming back from the dead, blind people seeing, lame people walking. It's impossible to look at the Bible and go, oh, that's normal. Right? We look at the Bible and go, that is strange. And if you don't think of that as strange, then you have a different definition of strange than I do. But I think it's okay because I think there's an aspect of our faith that only grows as we lean into tension, as we ask questions. And here's my commitment to you over the next 6 weeks. And it's really my commitment to you as the pastor of this church. I'm never going to pretend we have all the answers. We don't have all the answers. What I want to do is I want to inspire you to ask new questions. Because if I can inspire you to ask new questions, then it challenges your heart. It challenges your mind. It causes you to grow deeper in your relationship with God because you're going to have to trust Him in new ways. You're going to have to investigate Him in new ways. You're going to have to lean into some tension that you may have just accepted from the time that you were in the preschool of the church that you grew up in. And their little flannel graph or a little slideshow or whatever it was that taught you the little Bible stories. And you're going to have to go, okay, as a 28-year-old adult, as a 35-year-old adult, as a 52-year-old adult, what do I really believe to be true about this? And as you do that, God is going to show up in some strange and unbelievable ways, I think. And He's going to grow your faith. And so one of the questions I want to ask as we start this series is, do you believe that the miracles of Jesus as recorded in the New Testament are true? Do you believe that they actually happened? Nobody can answer that question for you but you. And more importantly, do you believe that miracles still happen today? Do you believe that the miraculous, the divine, the powerful work of God is still at work in our lives today? And to uncover that answer, you're going to have to decide what you consider to be a miracle. As I interact with people in our church, I know that there have been some miracles that have taken place in your life. Maybe you don't recognize them as miracles. There's some of you that had a really broken marriage. Some of you that were on the cusp of divorce. That's my story. My wife and I were separated for 2.5 months 12 years ago, and I look back on that and I see God weaving restoration and forgiveness and redemption into our story, and I think that's a miracle. And when we stop recognizing that kind of stuff as miracles, we begin to lose gratitude for the things that God does. Some of you could not have kids for years, and you prayed and you prayed and you prayed that God would allow you to have kids, and you were able to. And that's a miracle. Now, that kid is like 5 years old and they don't look like a miracle anymore, right? Like they've kept you up for the last 5 years, right? Some of you have prayed and prayed and prayed that God would allow you to have kids, and it hasn't happened, and so you've adopted. And those adopted kids are miracles. Some of you, I know your story, and I know that your marriage didn't make it. But God has restored your heart. He's renewed your passion. He's brought redemption to your life in the process of your divorce, despite your marital status. And can I just say that's a miracle? Some of you have had health issues, and you have prayed that God would take them away, and God hasn't, for whatever reason, taken them away, but He's given you the grace and the strength to walk through those issues. Can I just say that I think that's a miracle? I believe that we experience divine solutions to earthly problems every single day, and my hope is as we kick off this series that our eyes will be open and that our vision would be renewed to see the daily activity of Jesus in our life and see it as miraculous. We have a better vision to see the miracles that God is doing every single day. So I want to look at John chapter 2 today. If you have a Bible, you can turn there. If you don't, you can open up the app or you can follow along on the screen. And this miracle that we're going to look at is the very first miracle that Jesus performs. And it's one that I think some of you are going to enjoy because it's water turning into wine. Okay? And so some of you are like, I'm all on board with that. So let's look at John chapter 2, verses 1 through 11. It says this. The next day there was a wedding celebration in the village of Cana in Galilee. Jesus' mother was there, and Jesus and his disciples were also invited to the celebration. The wine supply ran out during the festivities, so Jesus' mother told him, they have no more wine. Now, scholars believe that this wedding wasn't just a typical wedding. I mean, it was a typical wedding, but for Jesus' mom to be as involved as she was in the wine distribution and the wine consumption, and kind of acting like a wedding planner in this instance, they believe that this is either a family member of Jesus or good friends of Jesus, that they are invited there for a purpose, that Jesus is at this wedding, but he's not just a casual attender. This had to be somebody close to the family of Jesus. And they run out of wine, and Mary immediately thinks, you know what? My son is the Son of God. He can do something about this. And so she goes to Jesus, and she says, hey, they're out of wine. Wink, wink. Right? Like, hey, I know you can do something about it. It reminds me of, have you guys seen Spider-Man Homecoming? Anybody seen that movie? All right, some of you. I'm not going to ruin it for you, but in the movie, there's this guy named Ned who's like Peter Parker's good friend, probably his best friend in the movie. And once he finds out that Peter Parker is Spider-Man, he's constantly egging him on. Oh, dude, you could do this. Oh, you could do this. Oh, man, just like tell everybody you're Spider-Man. He's constantly asking him to reveal all the secret Spidey powers that Peter Parker has. And Peter Parker's like, no, I'm not going to do that. I'm not going to do that. And that's what I see Mary doing in this instance, right? Like she's coming to Jesus like, hey, you thinking what I'm thinking? Because I'm thinking you can turn water into wine, all right? Like she's coming to Jesus like, and Jesus is like, oh, Mom, right? Like that's what he does. Look at verse 4. Dear woman, that's not our problem. Jesus replied, my time has not yet come. And then I love, Mary just completely ignores the Son of God, all right? She just says, but his mother told the servants, do whatever he tells you, all right? So she's like, that's good for you. I'm going to manipulate a miracle right here, okay? So she tells the servants, hey, do whatever Jesus tells you. So Jesus is like, fine, all right, I'll do it. Verse 6. That's the disposition I see in this that's probably not conveyed with the writing because Jesus had no intentions. He says his time has not come. He has no intentions of doing this miracle until Mary asked him. Standing nearby were 6 stone water jars used for Jewish ceremonial washing. Each could hold 20 to 30 gallons. Okay, there's getting ready to be a party going on, okay? 20 to 30 gallons times 6, okay? I don't know how many gallons. I'm not a good math person, but some of you are. You can figure that out. Jesus told the servants, fill the jars with water. When the jars had been filled, he said, now dip some out and take it to the master of ceremonies. So there's this guy who's kind of overseeing the entire experience, the wedding experience, making sure the guests have a good time. So the servants followed his instructions. When the master of ceremonies tasted the water that was now wine, not knowing where it had come from, though of course the servants knew. Okay, so John wants you to know that the servants, the people who are lowest on the totem pole, were the first observers of this miracle. He called the bridegroom over, and he's kind of like, what's going on here? What am I missing? A host always serves the best wine first. You know why that was? Because the host would serve the best wine first so he could serve the watered down wine later because people were already going to be so drunk that they wouldn't notice that the wine at the later part of the wedding was already watered down. They would have enjoyed themselves so much that the quality of wine would not have been noticed toward the end of the party. But I love what he says here. The host always serves the best wine first. Then when everyone had a lot to drink, he brings out the less expensive wine. But you have kept the best until now. Another translation says, but you have kept the best until last. That's what God does, isn't it? He comes through with the best, even in the last. This miraculous sign at Cana in Galilee was the first time Jesus revealed his glory and his disciples believed. And so what I want to do is I want to paint in broad strokes as it pertains to miracles in general. And then we're going to dive into specific miracles each week of the series and how it pertains to our life. But I want to give you just 4 kind of observations about miracles derived directly from this text. And the first is this: the miraculous power of Jesus is present in the ordinary aspects of our lives. The miraculous power of Jesus is present in the ordinary aspects of our lives. The next day, verses 1 and 2, there was a wedding celebration in the village of Cana in Galilee. Jesus' mother was there, and Jesus and his disciples were also invited. See, the most amazing aspect about this miracle is the non-amazing aspect of this miracle. This wedding was, we don't even know the people who were invited to this, or who were getting married. Their names aren't even listed. This is the first public display of Jesus' God-given authority. This is the first public display, first time Jesus is ever going to use his divine power. Now, if I'm Jesus, I'm calling down fire from heaven, right? I'm bringing somebody back from the dead. Like, I'm coming out with a boom, right? Like, I'm like completely like showing off, right? But Jesus doesn't even want to do this miracle. This miracle isn't even his idea. Jesus casually turns water into wine at a no-name couple's wedding that we don't even know who they are. And it wasn't even his idea. And nobody even knew about it except for his disciples, him, his mom, and some servants. It wasn't this big, audacious demonstration of power. It was, go fill up some water jars, and then by the time they got to the master of ceremonies to be dipped out, it was wine. It was so low key, which is not how, if I had some divine power, I would be like, woof, watch this, right? And some fireworks or something. Jesus is so under the radar here. And this miracle takes place in a town, actually it's called a village, and it's 9 miles outside of Galilee. It's like in the middle of nowhere. The town itself is insignificant. The town itself is mundane. The town itself isn't memorable. You know why I know? Because it doesn't exist today. Our archaeologists and scholars can't even find where the town or the village of Cana was. They know it was 9 miles outside of Galilee. They just don't know in what direction. And there's no remains. Cana's only mentioned one other time in the New Testament. So it's this insignificant town with nameless people and a low-key miracle that doesn't even draw attention, that only servants know about. It wasn't this cultural epicenter of Jerusalem where Jesus could have pronounced his kingdom and demonstrated his power and completely wowed the audience and gotten a lot of people to follow him. Jesus comes in as an invited guest, and his mom manipulates this miracle, and Jesus is like, fine, I'll do it. Here's the best wine you've ever had. Have you ever felt like God wasn't interested in the insignificant parts of your life? God wasn't really interested in the ordinary aspects of your life. Your job isn't that important, so why would God care about your job? Your health issues are so insignificant compared to other people's health issues, so why would God even hear your prayers? Your dating life is so broken, why would God ever step into the dysfunction of your relational world? Why are you asking for a miracle in your marriage? Don't you know that God has better things to do, more spectacular people to help than you? Have you ever felt like God is so uninterested in the boring, mundane, ordinary aspects of your life? What this miracle represents, this very first miracle takes place at someone's wedding that we don't even know their name, and Jesus casually turns water into wine. And what he is saying is, hey, I am interested in the most mundane, the most ordinary, the most boring aspects of your life. I'm in the details. And if Jesus can turn water into wine, he can turn your hurt into healing. He can turn your anxiety into peace. He can turn your anger into joy. Nothing is beneath him. Jesus longs to step into the most ordinary aspects of your life with his divine power. Nothing is beneath the Son of God when it comes to you, when it comes to me. The second principle here is a miracle begins with one person believing in the supernatural ability of Jesus. A miracle begins with just one person believing in the supernatural ability of Jesus. For those of you that know my wife and I, you would know that she is calculated, planned out, strategic. I'm strategic, but I'm a little bit more spontaneous, a little bit more impulsive. By a little, I mean a lot. And my wife, she is faith-filled, and so once she knows God is on board, she's willing to step out in faith, but she starts from a cautious standpoint. I start from like, why not, right? She's asking why. I'm like, why not? Let's do it, all right? Let's trust God for big things. Nothing like amazing ever happens unless you trust God for big things. And so I'm constantly willing to step out of the boat and jump off the cliff. And she's like, oh, let's see if there's a parachute. Let's see if Jesus is actually on the water before we start walking on the water, okay? And so when we started this adoption process back in June, we were both a little cautious. Her by nature, me just like by the sheer overwhelmingness of it, and it was going really fast, even for me. And so we start down this road. We get this text message about these kids, 9 and 7. Are you willing to consider adopting them? And what do we need to do? We fill out this profile on a Thursday. We send it in. The lady from the adoption agency texts us back, who's our friend, and she goes to Hope City, and she's like, all right, well, the mom wants to talk to you. And I'm like, when? She's like, Monday. This was on a Thursday. I'm like, oh my gosh, can we have the weekend, please? And so we pray about it over the weekend, knowing that this conversation is coming on Monday, that we're going to get to know the birth mom. That was our goal. That was our plan. It was a process here. So we have this conversation on Monday, and it's going really well. She gets emotional. We get emotional. At the very end of the conversation, she says, oh, man, I really want you to be the parents of my kids. Now, I don't know if you've ever had anybody say that to you. I've never had anybody say that to me except my wife, okay? And it happened over 9 months with her, okay? This was like over 4 days. And it was like the gravity and the heaviness of that decision like just came washing over us. I'm like, I thought we were just getting to know each other. I didn't know we were walking down the aisle, right? Like this is really happening. So we get through that conversation, and the next day I happened to text Tina, and I said, hey, by the way, we've had this conversation. She wants us to be the kids' parents. We're going to meet with her on Saturday. How much does this cost? And she sends me this text message with an itemized list of all the expenses for each kid. And I was like, oh my gosh, I probably should have asked that on Thursday, right? Like now I'm already into it, right? Like I've already bought the car. Now I'm asking how much the payments are. It's like kind of what I'm doing here. I'm like, oh my goodness, $28,987. And I was processing in my mind, do I share this with Trish or not share this with Trish, right? Because she's strategic and calculated. I'm like, oh my gosh. And so I get on the computer, I create this YouCaring page and don't publish it. And I'm like, okay, we're going to see if God is in this or not. The next day, I get on a plane to take our son, Elijah, out to California to work for the summer. I land in the Denver airport, and Trisha had spent the morning calling all of her family members, telling them that we were adopting these kids. So it's kind of hard to go back at that point, right? Like, oh my gosh. She's like, who have you not told? I'm like, well, I haven't told my brothers, I haven't told my sister, I barely told my mom. And because I kept thinking, this is crazy. And she's like, what are you scared about? And I'm like, well, the next 11 years of my life, basically, that's what I kind of, and I said, she's like, you're upset or you're overwhelmed by the money, aren't you? I'm like, yes, we don't have $28,000 just sitting there waiting to just give to some adoption agency. She's like, call your sister, publish the page, God is going to provide. And it was just that reassurance that I needed in that moment because I wasn't really believing in the supernatural aspect of God. My wife, who it was counterintuitive for her to say something like that, was the reassurance that I needed. And so 8 days later, we had raised the money. And some of you were part of that process. Some of you sat and watched that process play out. And you could not watch that process play out and not think, okay, man, God is all over this. Just supernatural, divine appointment after supernatural, divine provision. And I think so often, we look at the human aspect of things and we don't necessarily believe in the supernatural aspect of God. And I think part of the reason why is we've been conditioned to believe this false theology that if you pray for a miracle and a miracle doesn't happen, you know what? It was your fault. You didn't have enough faith. If your faith was just stronger, God would have shown up for you. If your faith was just stronger, you would have been healed. If your faith was just stronger, you would have been able to have children. If your faith was stronger, your marriage would have survived. If your faith was stronger, you would not have lost your job. And that's just a warped view of God's grace. That's a work view of who God is. That he's somehow this person that's just holding out on us and waiting for us to build up this amazing faith before he actually gives us any blessings at all. That's not how God is. I've prayed for people to be healed from cancer that have died from cancer. I've prayed for pregnancies to survive that have been lost. Why does that happen? Can I just tell you, I don't know. I don't know why God doesn't bring divine healing to every single person who's sick. I don't know why God doesn't bring divine intervention to every marriage that's broken. I don't know why God doesn't bring divine intervention to every pregnancy that is lost. I have no idea why that happens. But I think it speaks less to our faith or the strength of our faith and more to the plan and provision and providence of God. The Bible says that his ways are not our ways, that his thoughts are not our thoughts. There is an aspect of God that we will never understand on this side of heaven. And so it has less to do with the inadequacy of your faith and more to do with the sovereignty of God. That one day we will know what we know in part now, we will know in full another time as we enter into heaven. It doesn't take away our questions, but it allows us to say, okay, if I have faith in Jesus to do supernatural things, it doesn't mean that he will always do supernatural things. What it does mean is it opens the possibility of him doing supernatural things. Not believing in Jesus to do supernatural things could be as detrimental, is more detrimental than having faith and it not happening. Look what happens in John chapter 2, verse 3. It says, the wine supply ran out during the festivities, so Jesus' mother told him, they have no more wine. There was one person at that wedding that believed in Jesus to do the supernatural thing. In a really mundane thing. It wasn't really that life or death, right? I mean, it was party or no party. That was the whole issue here. But Mary believed Jesus could bring the party. In the book of Mark, Jesus comes home to his hometown of Nazareth, and the red carpet is not rolled out for him. And the first 4 verses, I didn't put this on the screen, but I want to read this to you. It says this: Jesus left that part of the country and he returned with his disciples to Nazareth, his hometown. The next Sabbath, he began teaching in the synagogue, and many who heard him were amazed. They asked, where did he get all this wisdom and power to perform such miracles? Then they scoffed. He's just a carpenter, the son of Mary, and the brother of James and Joseph and Judas and Simon. And his sisters, they live right here among us. They were deeply offended and they refused to believe in him. Then look what verse 5 of Mark chapter 6 says. And because of their unbelief, Jesus couldn't do any miracles among them except to place his hands on a few sick people and heal them. And Jesus was amazed at their unbelief. There are times that our unbelief in Jesus has as much of an impact on his power being displayed as our belief. So let me ask you this. What area of your life are you just not believing God to show up in? Your finances, your job, your relationships, your addiction, your anger, your insecurity? Believing in Jesus to show up doesn't guarantee that he will in the way that you want him to or that I want him to, but not believing in him guarantees that he won't, as displayed in Mark chapter 6. So our role isn't to figure out the mind and heart of God. Our role is to believe that Jesus can and will show up in supernatural ways. Third principle here: miracles aren't as dependent on God's power as they are on our obedience. You might be thinking, what do you mean by that? What I mean by that is God already has all the power he needs to perform every miracle that he could ever perform. God has all the power that he needs to perform miracles. The missing part of the equation most of the time is our obedience. Look at verse 5 of John 2. But his mother told the servants, do whatever he tells you to do. See, we want the mighty power of God in our everyday lives, but we don't want to offer Jesus our everyday obedience. We want the miracles of God, but we want to ignore the commands of God. And Mary says, do whatever he tells you to do. And as I think about my journey with God over the last 34 years of being a Christian, this is the area of my life that I've been most hypocritical. It's easy to expect God to come through for me while I knowingly ignore what he's asked me to do. For years, when my wife and I were student pastors, student ministry doesn't make a lot of money. And we would struggle financially. We had 3 young kids, and I would be resentful about how much the church was paying me, resentful how much God wasn't providing for us. And we would talk about it. We would argue about it, me and God and me and Trish. And we were just on different pages. And I would say things like, why did the brakes just go out? Or why did the furnace just quit? Or why did this medical bill just hit us right now? Come on, God. Can't you see I'm working hard for you? Can't you see all the kids I'm trying to win over for you? Can't you see all the ways I'm trying to serve you? What is going on? And about 12 years ago, my wife and I had a come to Jesus meeting, pun intended, and she's like, hey, the issue is not with God. The issue is with you. You teach on putting God first. You teach on prioritizing finances, but you don't do that. You give God leftovers, but then you expect him to come through in our finances. The issue is not with God's faithfulness, it's with your obedience. And so God is going to be faithful when you start being obedient. And so 12 years ago, we made this decision. We're going to give God the first 10%. We give a little bit more than 10% now, but 12 years ago, we started at 10%. We're like, we're going to give the first 10%. And you know what? The brakes still go out, and the furnace still stops working. And my kid breaks a tooth off in a basketball game, and it's $600 at the dentist. That stuff still happens. But you know what has changed? The priorities of my heart. My ability to see the blessings of God in my life, that he gives way more than I could ever ask or imagine. And all he's asking me to do is be obedient. For the first 10 years of our marriage, my wife and I argued all the time about the level of intimacy in our marriage relationship. And by the word intimacy, I mean, you know what I mean. The PG-13 version, okay? The level of intimacy, sexual intimacy in our marriage relationship. We were on different pages. And we would talk about it, then we would argue about it, then we would give each other the silent treatment about it. And it was just this never-ending struggle. She didn't understand the priority that should be, and she wouldn't, hear my side of the story, and we would, argue about the frequency, and we'd argue about the purpose and the meaning of it, and it just went round and round and round. And it was just frustrating. And I wasn't just frustrated with her, I was frustrated with God. I thought, God, why in the world would you torture me by allowing me to commit my life to somebody who has zero priority in this area of our marriage? She doesn't desire this like I do. She doesn't really think about the frequency of this. It's a way low priority for her. Why in the world would you allow me to go through this? I don't understand why you're not being faithful. All the while, I was allowing myself to be addicted to pornography. So I had this huge issue with sexual intimacy and the way that my wife would display that in my marriage, while at the same time completely disobeying. Think about what is true and righteous and pure and holy and lovely. Think about these things. I wasn't thinking about those things. So I was inviting all this sin into my heart, all this sin into my life, all this darkness and secrecy into my world, and then holding my wife hostage for how intimate she wasn't being with me. It doesn't work that way. We don't get that option. God is saying, hey, why don't you start being obedient? Then I'll start blessing you with intimacy. Because the word intimacy means to be fully known. It's not just sex. And so when you want to be fully known, when you want to really allow me to take control of this aspect of your life, I will give you the desires of your heart in this aspect of your life. But you can't expect this and invite this. It doesn't work that way. And so let me ask you, just to do an inventory in your life, are you asking God to show up in miraculous ways in your life, but unwilling to be obedient? Are you asking God to show up and perform a miracle in your marriage, but you're unwilling to forgive your spouse? You're unwilling to tell your spouse the truth? Are you asking God to show up in a miraculous way in the life of your kid and get your adult child back on track, but all you do is verbally abuse them? Are you asking God to show up in a miraculous way in your job, but you show up late, you leave early, you don't give your best? Are you asking God to show up in a miraculous way in your dating life, but you don't date people that pull you closer to God, you date people that pull you further away from God? See, the miracles of God, as I've seen in the Bible, the miracles of God always follow the obedience of his people. We think miracles follow great faith. Great faith is a byproduct of small steps of obedience. Like when we're obedient in small ways, God grows our faith and enlarges our perspective of him and shows up in miraculous ways. The people in the Bible that saw God do great things, they just didn't have great faith. They obeyed in small ways. And the people that didn't experience God's grace, the people that didn't experience God's miracles, were the ones that were obedient or disobedient in little ways. And so I think this is a huge thing. If we're going to hold God hostage to how we think he should show up, then we have to inventory our life and say, are we really living the life that God has called us to live? Because we don't have the right to point out all of the inconsistencies in God and not look at the mirror in ourselves. Lastly, the purpose of miracles is to deepen our belief in Jesus. The purpose of every single miracle you're going to see in the scriptures is to deepen our belief in Jesus. Look at verse 11. This miraculous sign at Cana in Galilee was the first time Jesus revealed his glory, and his disciples believed in him. Now, you might think, well, why did the disciples just believe in him? What's going on here? Well, if you look at John chapter 1, which is obviously the chapter before this, the first half of John chapter 1 is the Word became flesh and dwelt among us. It's talking about the creation of the world and the Trinity and all that. But then the second half of John chapter 1 is an account of Jesus recruiting his disciples. He's traveling to different places. He's talking to different people. He's challenging them to come follow him. Help me create this new movement. Help me create this new community. I want you to be a part of this new kingdom. And unbelievably, these guys who have never met Jesus before feel compelled to follow him. They feel compelled to leave everything and follow Jesus. And so they leave businesses, and they leave friends, and they leave family, and they leave the comforts of home, and they go on this journey with somebody that is claiming to be the Son of God. They don't know that yet. Jesus has never demonstrated his power yet. He's barely even taught at this point. But they feel compelled to follow him. And so they get to this wedding, and they're just guests at the wedding. They're just low-key at the wedding. They're just in the background of the wedding. They're just there to enjoy the party. And Jesus gets talked into this miracle. And the servants see it, and the disciples see it. And it changes everything. Because they believe. It compels them to believe that Jesus is who he says he is. See, the movement of God and the miracles of God are constantly working to grow your faith and to move you closer to Jesus. That's the whole purpose of every divine intervention that God has ever given throughout history, is to allow us to get to know his character more so that we can trust in him more, so we can believe in him more. And when people look at the miracle of Hope City, whether it be now or 10 years from now, and you think, well, Hope City is a miracle? I think it's a miracle. You know why? Because if I talk to half of you in this room and I said 15 months ago, hey, at 10:30 on Sunday morning on October the 15th, 2017, you're going to be sitting in a banquet hall, pretending like it's a church, right? Raising your hands and worshiping God. Some of you are like, that's crazy. I'm never going to do that. I don't even go to church. It's a miracle. When people look at the miracle that I think is this church, I don't want them to think about great worship. I don't want them to think about the teaching. I don't want them to think about amazing coffee or waffles. I want them to think about the person of Jesus. You know why? Because that's what brings hope to people. That's what brings transformation to hearts. And if we do nothing else as a church, we can have all of the great worship that we want. We can have all of the dynamic teaching that we can muster up. If we don't have the person and the presence of Jesus, nothing changes. And that's the whole goal, is to bring hope and healing and new beginnings to this world. And you know who that starts with? It doesn't start with me. It doesn't start with a worship leader. It doesn't start with the people who are greeting at the door. It starts with the person of Jesus Christ, because he is the only one that is capable of doing miracles. And what he says is, greater things will you do than even these. That we have the power and the Spirit of Christ that raised him from the dead. We have that living in us, not for ourselves, not for our own glory, but to inspire the belief in others in our community. And so here's the question. Do you believe the miracles of Jesus that's recorded in the New Testament are true? Do you believe it? And if you don't, it's okay. You're welcome to go on the journey. But do you believe that God still performs miracles today? Because here's what I believe. I believe that everything that God did in his word, he wants to do again. He wants to do in our time. And he's not looking for the brightest and the most talented and the most gifted and the most elite and the most affluent. He's looking for a small group of people who have the tiny glimmer of faith and the courage to obey, that beg him for a miraculous work in their life. And when that happens, the divine intersects this world and it changes everything. Let's pray together.